is being recorded, and we will be sharing a video recording of this presentation after the fact with everyone who's registered. It will be made public as well. Colleagues, my name is Karim Al-Bayar. Thank you very much for joining us for today's business briefing on the Türkiye earthquake humanitarian response. This session is being organized by Business for Goals, the Business for Goals platform, or B4G, the Turkish Enterprise and Business Confederation, or TÜRKONFED, and the OCHA-UNDP Connecting Business Initiative. For those of you who are not familiar with us, the Connecting Business Initiative is a joint program of the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, or OCHA, and the United Nations Development Program, or UNDP. We're very excited to have you join us today for this business briefing, which aims to provide an overview of the UN and humanitarian organizations and what we're doing in support of the government-led response to the Türkiye earthquakes. We're hoping to facilitate an exchange of updates and insights on how the private sector can support the response and recovery efforts. Here's our agenda for today. We're going to start with a very brief set of opening remarks and welcome. We'll then hear from the Senior Humanitarian Coordinator of the United Nations System in Türkiye, Sebastian Rhodes Stampa, who will be sharing with us an overview of the humanitarian response in Türkiye. My colleague Rhiza Nery will then come to join us and discuss how the private sector can help. We've left the majority of our time for questions and answers, and of course, we'll have a brief wrap-up and closing. Now, before we jump into the actual substance of the session, we would really like to know a little bit more about all of you. And I see, as I said, a little bit over 100 people on the line with us at the moment. So we'd like to ask you to please take out your phones at this point and go to www.menti.com and enter in this code 38454298. We're going to ask a few quick questions about who's with us today. So if you've been able to log in, we should be seeing the responses here to our very first question. Thank you, colleagues, for those of you who already answered. We're looking to see what type of organization you represent. Are you a local Turkish business, an international business, an NGO, or a UN humanitarian organization? Perhaps you're with us from the government of Türkiye or another government, an academic institution, or another type of organization. So we ask that you please respond to this survey and we'll see these numbers update live, I hope. I see some entries coming in here. We'll just give it another moment or two to give everyone a chance to sign in at menti.com using that code 38454298. This will help us to have a better idea of who's with us on the line today and ensure that we deliver content that is customized to your own questions and concerns. So I see we have a fairly even distribution across the categories. The majority of our participants on from the business community. I'll just give this one more moment. I see 62 people who have voted for so far out of a little over 120 people in the room. So we have about half the room here. Thank you again for your voting. Thank you for sharing with us this background and information. It's very helpful for us to know who we're speaking to. Okay, so I see about 64 votes. And again, thank you very much for sharing this with us. We see a little over half the room, it looks like, from the business community. The remainder is from NGOs, UN, humanitarian organizations, and other stakeholders. We'd like to ask you a second question now. Let me come to this, if it will work with me. Yep. Okay. It's always nice when the technical. Let's see if we can make this work here. So our second question is, where are you calling in from today? And again, if you're on menti.com, you can just click anywhere on the map. It will let us know where you're calling in from today. It'll help us to have a better sense of the participation. Again, we thank you for this initial bit of interactivity. We promise after this, we'll go right into the substance of our call today. So really great global coverage, of course, as expected, the majority of the participants coming in from Türkiye. And we'll just give this one a few more moments as well. I see 56 people who have voted in so far. And thank you again for sharing this with us. Just give this 5 more seconds. Well, again, thank you to everybody who's voted so far. Very helpful for us to see the global interest and the coverage of the participation here. This is the last question we'd like to ask you today. And the question is, what are you hoping to take away from today's meeting? And this is really just an open question for all of you. We look forward to seeing your responses. And we'll jump right into the substance of the session after this. Now, if you write in, don't worry, it's not going to show your name. It is helpful for us to know what you're interested in. And I see, what are we hoping to take away from today's meeting? The importance of the private sector and humanitarian assistance. Hope, very important given the current circumstances. Lessons to be learned for elsewhere. Insights on how I can help the responses of business. Learning about CBI's activities. Thank you very much for those of you who have responded so far. And if you haven't had a chance to respond and you have a question or comment at any point during the interview or during the session today, please use the Q&A or comment box at the bottom of your screen. For those of you who are asking questions, everybody can see the questions that are asked. And if you see a question that you also would like answered, please use the thumbs up button. It's there on the screen, and it will help us as we get to the Q&A section to ensure that we prioritize the questions that are most asked and most of interest to those of you who are on the line with us today. Now, without further ado, I see quite a few updates here have come in, so I'll just read a couple of these before we go on to our next slides. Lessons from past experiences, ideas for future crisis, lessons learned on how to be better prepared, what is happening and what are the needs. Thank you again to all of you who have responded so far. This is very helpful. So now I'd like to pass the floor to Ms. İrem Kayacık. She is the president of the Business for Goals platform and will be giving us introductory remarks. Ms. İrem, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Karim. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to proceed my speech in Turkish, but I just want to say welcome to our international guests. Değerli katılımcılar, Türkiye'deki depremlerde insani müdahaleye genel bakışla ilgili toplantımıza katıldığınız için teşekkür ederiz. Öncelikle kısaca sizlere Hedefler İçin İş Dünyası platformumuzla ilgili kısa bir bilgilendirme yapmayı arzu ederim. Hedefler İçin İş Dünyası platformu, yani Business for Goals, iş dünyası ve sürdürülebilir kalkınma amaçları arasındaki köprüyü kurmak ve iş dünyasının sürdürülebilir kalkınmadaki rolünü güçlendirmek amacıyla kalkınma amaçlarını politika ve stratejilerine entegre etmesi için ...2019 yılında TÜSİAD'ın güçlendirmek amacıyla kurulan uluslararası bir platform olan Connecting Business Initiative, CBI içerisinde biz de B4G olarak TÜRKONFED ile birlikte Türkiye ağına ev sahipliği yapıyoruz. Bu bağlamda özel sektör için dayanıklılık ve hızlı iyileşme sürecini sağlamak üzere afetler içinde özellikle deprem konusuna odaklandık. Beklenen İstanbul depremine yönelik iş dünyasını bir araya getirmeyi hedefleyen çalışmalarımız da oldu. Ayrıca geçmişte gerçekleşen Elazığ ve İzmir depremlerinde de mobilize olduk. İklim krizi temelli afetler konusunda özel olarak da eğitimler ve webinarlar düzenledik. Platform olarak amacımız iş dünyasının afetlere dayanıklılığını arttırmak ve afet sonrası yeniden toparlanma sürecine ekonomik, çevresel ve toplumsal boyutlarıyla katkı sunmaktır. Sevgili katılımcılar. 6 Şubat'ta
Colleagues,
Maraş
please
ve
forgive
çevre
us for those of you who are connecting from
bölgelerinde
Turkey and around the world. It looks like
gerçekleşen
Miss İrem is having
deprem sonrası
some connection problems. We'll give her a moment to see if she reconnects. Miss İrem, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, if you can, perhaps I'm going to suggest that you turn off your video just due to the bandwidth issue. And if you can back up just 1 minute, we missed the last part of your remarks. My apologies. Over.
Okay, thank you. Let me try one more. And if I get disconnected again, I will turn off my video because I think moment of loss. Sevgi şimdiye kadar belki hiç bu kadar önemli olmamıştı. Bu afetin büyüklüğü sadece devletin veya özel sektörün veya iş dünyasının tek başına altından kalkabileceği bir boyutta değil. Yaşadığımız bu depremlerde ülkece bazı kırılganlıklarımızda belirginleşti. Küçükten ve büyüğe.
Well, I'm very much regret that we're not hearing the full set of Miss İrem's remarks. And Miss İrem will try and reconnect with you a moment later.
Veya tamamen
Okay. I apologize, Miss İrem, and I apologize to all of you who are connected. As you know, the connections are a little bit unpredictable. Given the circumstances, I suggest we go now to our second opening remark speaker. It's Mr. Arda Batu. He is the Secretary General and a member of the Board of Directors of the Turkish Enterprise and Business Confederation, or TÜRKONFED. Arda, the floor is yours, Arda Bey.
Thank you, Mr. Elbayar. I hope my voice is coming through all right. I'll proceed with speaking in Turkish, just to prepare the interpreters. My voice is coming out all right. Okay. All right. Çok teşekkürler değerli katılımcılara bizlerle beraber olduğunuz için. Biz Türkiye'de faaliyet gösteren bağımsız ve gönüllü bir iş dünyası örgütüyüz, TÜRKONFED olarak. Bağımsız ve gönüllü bir iş dünyası örgütü olarak 50.000'den fazla üyemiz var. Türkiye'nin 4 bir yanında üyelerimiz mevcuttur. 30 federasyon ve 300'den fazla dernek üyemiz mevcut. Şimdi I think I'm also getting cut off, Karim, so I'll just shut off my camera. I just got a warning from my team. All right, so is my voice coming out all right?
Yes, Arda, we can hear you.
All right. All right, apologies for the interruption. I'll continue in Turkish. TÜRKONFED olarak 300'den fazla derneğimiz ve 50.000'den fazla üyemiz mevcut. Ve Türkiye'nin 4 bir yanında da üyelerimizin olduğunu söyleyebilirim. Tabii Türkiye'nin 4 bir yanında üyesi olması demek TÜRKONFED'in maalesef ki deprem bölgesinde de yoğun bir üyelimizin topluluğunun olduğunu söyleyebilirim. Dolayısıyla depremi, doğal afeti birebirden, yakından yaşamış bir sivil toplum örgütüyüz. Şimdi biz TÜRKONFED olarak, bunu da övünerek söyleyebilirim, 2018'den bu yana Connecting Business Initiative'in, CBI'nin bir üyesiyiz. Bir iş dünyası örgütü neden doğal afetlerle ilgilenir sorusuyla çokça karşılaştığımı burada açıklıkla ifade etmek isterim. Bu sorunun cevabını herhalde burada açıklamaya ihtiyacı hissetmeyeceğim. Neden bir iş dünyası örgütünün doğal afetle ilgilendiğini, neden bir iş dünyası örgütünün üyelerine ve kamuoyunu bu konuyla ilgili farkındalık yaratmaya çalıştığını sanıyorum bu doğal afette acı bir şekilde yaşadık. Biz usanmadan, moralimizi bozmadan 2018 yılından beri doğal afetler özelinde eğitim programları tasarlıyoruz. Farkındalık kampanyaları düzenliyoruz. Koçluk hizmeti veriyoruz. Ve iş dünyasına usanmadan doğal afetlere yönelik, hazırlanmalarına yönelik naçizane destek olmaya çalışıyoruz. 2018'den bu yana İrem Hanım da konuşmasında değindi. Gururla paydaşı olduğumuz Business for Goals'la birlikte eğitimleri gerçekleştiriyoruz. Bu afetten önce bildiğiniz gibi İzmir, bundan öncesinde de Elazığ'da yine bir deprem yaşadık. Şimdi Türkiye bir deprem ülkesi değerli katılımcılar. Türk katılımcılar bunu çok iyi biliyor. Yabancı uzmanlar da çok iyi biliyor. Türkiye haritasının ve fay hat haritasına bakan herkes bunu çok iyi biliyor. Şimdi o yüzden bu sorunu ben anlamsız buluyorum. Neden bir iş dünyası örgütü doğal afetlerle ilgili çalışıyor? Bir iş dünyası örgütü doğal afetlerle Türkiye'de çalışmak zorunda. Nokta. Bence bu tartışmaya açık bir konu değil. Şimdi biz bu depremde neler yaptığımızı ben kısaca size anlatacağım. Neden bir iş dünyası örgütünün de bu alanla ilgili çalıştığı konusunda da sizlere naçizane aydınlatmaya çalışacağım. Şimdi biz doğal afet gerçekleştiği zaman 6 Şubat tarihinde iki şeyi biliyorduk. Geçmiş deneyimlerimizden ve Connecting Business Connecting Business Initiative'le olan ilişkimizden dolayı ve uluslararası tecrübemizden dolayı iki şey biliyorduk. Bir tanesi yerelde muazzam bir koordinasyon zorluğu olacaktı. Hele ki bu ölçekte gerçekleşen bir depremde Elazığ'dan çok daha yoğun bir yerelde koordinasyon sorunu olacağını ve sorunlar yaşanacağını biliyorduk. Bu işte gıda, battaniye, çadır gibi acil ihtiyaçların yerele ulaşılmasından, işte uluslararası arama kurtarma ekiplerinin konaklamasından veya ekipmanların toplanmasına kadar burada özellikle uzmanlarımızın da eminim çok iyi bildiği çok kritik bir 72 saat var. O 72 saat tabii ki bir hafta 10 güne kadar uzatabiliriz. O 10 gün boyunca TÜRKONFED yaklaşık 11 milyon dolarlık bir seferberlik gerçekleştirdi. Bu seferberliği de yine gururla ifade edebilirim. TÜRKONFED'in üye dernekleri, üye iş insanları, üye şirketlerinin yaptığı aynı katkılarla Türkiye'nin dört bir yanından bölgeye bu acil ihtiyaçları ulaştırmakta koordinasyon sağladı TÜRKONFED. İkinci bildiğimiz şey yine bu CBI ile olan ilişkimizden bir kazanılmış bir deneyimde ve bilgiydi. Ekonomik etki konusunun acil bir bilgi ihtiyacı olacağını biliyorduk. Şöyle ki biliyorsunuz bu doğal afetlerde ilk 72 saatin önemli olduğu kadar sonraki dönemde ekonomik toparlanma, ekonomik recovery denilen fazında çok önemli olduğunu bilen bir iş dünyası örgütüyüz. Bu yüzden de Connecting Business Initiative'den aldığımız geçmiş çalışmalarımızı bu depreme uyarlayarak, bu doğal afeti uyarlayarak bir ekonomik etki analiz raporu gerçekleştirdik. Şimdi bu sürenin de kısıtlı olduğunu bilerek ben ekip arkadaşlarımdan bu hem Türkçe hem İngilizce etki raporlarının linklerini buraya chat bölümüne yazmalarını rica ediyorum. Çok kabaca bilgi vermek gerekirse 85 milyar dolarlık bir ekonomik zarar, 70 bine varan can kaybı olmak üzere bir ekonomik etki rapor analizimiz gerçekleştirdik. Çoğunuzun da bildiği gibi ulusal ve uluslararası basında da genişçe yer aldı bu rapor. Bu iki ihtiyaçtan sonra şimdi biz üçüncü faz dediğimiz TÜRKONFED olarak üçüncü faza odaklandık. Üçüncü faz nedir? Yine Madagaskar'da da olsa, Filipinler'de de olsa bu fazlar 3 aşağı 5 yukarı. Üçüncü fazda da bizim barınma ihtiyacına yönelik bir desteğimiz söz konusu. Bölgede özellikle çadır eksiklikleri ve konteyner eksikliklerini bildiğimiz için bir konteyner kent konusunda düğmeye bastık ve ilk pilotumuzu da Hatay'ın Samandağ ilçesinde gerçekleştireceğiz. Hatay bildiğiniz gibi en çok etkilenen 3 bölgeden bir tanesi. Bu bölgede de sanıyorum bizim The Town İngilizcesi, kasaba kentimizin şöyle bir ayrıştırıcı unsurunu burada bahsedebilirim ve sözlerimi sonlandırabilirim. Acil ihtiyaç olduğu zaman bildiğiniz gibi herkes seferber olur ve işte çadır gönderir, konteyner gönderir. Ben depremden hemen sonra bölgede bu konteynerların ve çadırların da durumunu bizzat gözlemledim. İyi niyetle gönderilen çadır ve konteynerler doğal olarak o acil barınma ihtiyacını gidermek için çok gerekli ve çok yerinde destekler burada veriliyor. Ancak daha orta vadeli baktığınız zaman bu yaşama alanlarının insana yakışır şekilde olmasını çok önemsiyoruz kurum olarak. O yüzden kasaba adını verdiğimiz, The Town adını verdiğimiz konteyner kentimizin içerisinde biz sosyal rehabilitasyona izin veren, ortak çalışma alanlarına, yapısına izin veren, çocukların rehabilitasyonuna izin veren, berberinden marketine kadar bir nevi bir kasaba yaşama alanına müsaade eden bir kasaba kenti dizaynını tasarımını uzmanlarımızla beraber yaptık ve ilk adımlarını da attık. Önümüzdeki haftalarda da açılışını yapmayı hedefliyoruz. İlk yerleşimimizi gerçekleştirmeyi hedefliyoruz. Bundan sonra da hedefimiz arasında Adıyaman ve Maraş'ta da bu kasaba hayalimizi gerçekleştirmeyi düşünüyoruz. Burada elbette ki yerel yönetimler ve ilgili kamu otoriteleriyle beraber istişareli halde, eşgüdümlü halde bu hayalimizi gerçekleştirmeye gayret edeceğiz. Ben çok teşekkür ederim beni dinlediğiniz için. Sözü tekrar moderatörümüz Sayın Karim'e veriyorum.
Thank you so much, Arda Bey. Thank you, colleagues. We're running a little bit late, but Ms. İrem has reconnected by mobile and she's asked to just have another minute to wrap up her comments from before. So Ms. İrem, let me just ask you to keep it as brief as possible and we'll go straight into our next section. Over to you, please.
Thank you, Mr. Karim. I apologize for the previous disconnection. So I will wrap up quickly. Daha önce de belirttiğim gibi 6 Şubat'taki büyük deprem akabinde sadece tek paydaşla, sadece devletin veya özel sektörün veya iş dünyasının tek başına altından kalkabileceği bir boyutta bir afet yaşamadık. Dolayısıyla da bu kırılganlıklarımız daha da ortaya çıktı. Biz B4G olarak küçükten büyüğe kadar pek çok işletmenin tamamen zarar gördüğünü ve tedarik zinciri, altyapı, insan kaynağı gibi çok boyutlu bir sorunla karşı karşıya olduğumuzun farkındayız. Bu noktada iş dünyasının dayanıklılığını arttırmak, ülkenin dayanıklılığına direkt katkıda bulunacağına inanıyoruz. Bölgede yaşanan deprem felaketine sahada tabii ki TÜRKONFED çok direkt, Arda Bey'in de biraz önce bahsettiği gibi çalışmalar yaptı. Burada bize düşen rolün kamu, sivil toplum, akademiyle beraber çok paydaşlı yapıyı ortaya koymak olacağına inanıyoruz. Amacımız afete hazırlık ve dayanıklılık konusunda, bu olası İstanbul depremini de kapsıyor, kaynakların verimli olması, mükerrer olarak kullanılmaması noktasındadır ve yeniden planlama yapılırken kültürel, çevresel, sosyal ve ekonomik bütün öncelikleri optimize etmek çok önemli. Biz daha iyi, daha yeşil ve daha verimli şekilde bu bölgelerin planlanmasını arzu ediyoruz ve bu konuda yapılan çalışmaya katkıda bulunmak istiyoruz. Bu şekilde sözlerimi toparlamak isterim. Beni dinlediğiniz için tekrar teşekkür ediyorum ve sözümü tekrar moderatörümüz Sayın Albayar'a devrediyorum. Teşekkürler.
Well, thank you so much, Ms. İrem. Thank you so much, Mr. Arda. It's really a pleasure to hear from you, and apologies again for the problems with the connections. Colleagues, we'd now like to move directly into the substance of our session today, and we'll start now with an overview of the humanitarian response in Türkiye. I'm very pleased that we have with us on the line Mr. Sebastian Rhodes Stampa. He's the Senior Response Coordinator for the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, or OCHA. Sebastian has just arrived at the airport and I think is taking the call remotely. So Sebastian, we thank you for joining us and I welcome your remarks.
Thank you, Karim. Just to make sure you can hear me.
Coming through loud and clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Karim. Thank you, colleagues, so much for joining this call. It is critical that you have done so. As Karim said, my name is Sebastian. I'm the Senior Coordinator for the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. Very sadly, this is not my first earthquake, and it will not sadly be my last. But I'm going to talk about some numbers now, and numbers do not give a real picture of the suffering and the anguish that we see here throughout the affected area. I was in Maraş a couple of days ago and Hatay more recently. The level of destruction is horrendous. I liken it to earthquakes I've seen in Haiti or in Japan. Quite extraordinary. As you know now, 9.1 million people are directly affected by the earthquake in 11 hardest hit provinces. We seek to serve 5.2 million people with the United Nations and our partner organizations. To date, AFAD announced that 46,000 people have died. And colleagues, I can see that figure doubling, if not going higher. 214,000 buildings have collapsed or have been heavily damaged. The disruption to markets, to people's lives, continues way beyond the earthquake that took so many lives. Now, immediately following an emergency, in consultation with the government, the UN issues what we call a flash appeal, which aims to rapidly raise funds to support urgent humanitarian needs and life-saving priorities and ensure that the most critical needs are prioritized and support the government in knowing which organizations and projects are seeking funding, and that ensures transparency and accountability. The UN flash appeal for Türkiye and the earthquake response identifies 5.2 million people targeted by humanitarian partners and a $1 billion requirement to enable humanitarian organizations to rapidly ramp up their operations in earthquake-affected areas in support of the government-led response. And that flash appeal is time-limited. It is for a period of 3 months. In some cases, it can be extended. In this case, I don't think it will. So how do we organize ourselves? Well, the challenges are huge, and we must work closely with government and multiple partners from civil society, from non-governmental organizations, and from the private sector. To lead the response for the United Nations, a humanitarian coordinator is appointed, and he, in this case, oversees the humanitarian response and coordination amongst relevant humanitarian organizations. The humanitarian coordinator heads what we call the humanitarian country team, which is a decision-making forum comprised of relevant humanitarian organizations, both UN and non-UN, and is responsible for providing common strategic and policy guidance on issues related to humanitarian action in the country. Some humanitarian country teams in other countries invite private sector representatives as observers. As part of the humanitarian response, humanitarian organizations are grouped according to sectors based on their key focus of humanitarian action. And the sectors are, by way of example, shelter. And shelter is, of course, it's about tents, it's about transitional shelter, and so on. Health and nutrition, we have field hospitals here who are treating not only trauma victims, but supporting primary health care. WASH, which is a term we use to denote water, sanitation, and hygiene, particularly critical when you have camp settings. We've already had an outbreak of scabies, but other communicable diseases might not be far behind. We have cholera just across the border, and that would be really a worst case scenario for us. To support operations, we have emergency telecommunications, logistics. We have early recovery, which looks forward past the humanitarian operation to a time when businesses and people can recover, get their lives back on track, and then reconstruction further down the line. But we cover all areas. Food security, people still need food. Education, children need to return to school in a sense of normality. Temporary settlement, protection, a vast array of other services. This sector approach aims to strengthen partnerships and the predictability and accountability of international humanitarian action by improving prioritization and clearly defining the roles and responsibilities of humanitarian organizations. Now, as I said, I've done this a fair bit all over the world, and increasingly it is becoming clear that a key actor in any humanitarian response, in any humanitarian action, is the private sector. I've seen this in Mozambique, I've seen this in Haiti, I've seen this in the Ukraine. Private sector is an extraordinary force for good when well coordinated and well utilized. And if we can get a level of coordination with the United Nations, with the other humanitarian actors, with the government, then the private sector can do so much. Now, my colleague Rhiza is going to talk about this in the next session, so I won't go into the details, simply to say that I have found private sector engagement to be transformative to people's lives in a humanitarian response. And I very much hope, colleagues online, you can be that transformative process, that transformative agent that will enable us all to do what we are here to do, and that is to help people, to save lives and to alleviate suffering. Thank you so much for your time.
Sebastian, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your very sobering and very helpful remarks. Colleagues, for those of you who are connected online, I just want to remind you that if you have any questions or comments, you can use the chat or Q&A buttons at the bottom of your screen. Please do ask your questions. Let others see the questions that are asked. Don't wait for the Q&A portion of our session so that we can go right into addressing any questions or comments you may have. I'd now like to welcome, as Sebastian highlighted, Ms. Rhiza Nery, who will be speaking to us about how the private sector can help with the Türkiye humanitarian response. Rhiza is the private sector engagement advisor on Surge for OCHA. I'll let her tell us exactly what that means. And her regular job is as the network coordination specialist of the Connecting Business Initiative. Rhiza, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Kareem, and good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you for joining us. Among the many partners that get involved in humanitarian response, there is one which is a key player, but sometimes get overlooked, and that is the private sector. And I know exactly how this feels because before joining the UN, I was also from the private sector. And in my role now as the private sector engagement focal point supporting the UN Humanitarian Agency, I facilitate connections with local and international companies that want to support the humanitarian response because we know how important it is to include the private sector, as highlighted by Sebastian, when it comes to response and at the same time in recovery activities. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of your role here. From the very beginning of the response, we have seen how companies, big and small, have helped out in the best way they can, providing cash and in-kind contributions, hotels opening their doors to house responders, and mobile companies providing free Wi-Fi hotspots in the most affected areas. The private sector has been part of the response from the very beginning and continues to do so, not just by providing donations, but more importantly, by sharing your assets, expertise, and networks. Yesterday, I'm reminded by a colleague how Kayacık, for some of you who knows household appliance, a company was able to set up laundry service stations in Kahramanmaraş, Adıyaman, and Hatay. And again, given the massive emergency that we are in, no one actor can do this alone. And with the urgency to address the needs of the most affected people, the private sector can also bring innovative ideas and approaches. Shelter remains a top priority need for this response. And we have just heard from Arda of TÜRKONFED a while ago how they, together with Senefed and Habitat and a few partners, are now launching a sustainable living cities project in coordination with local authorities in Hatay, in Maraş, and also in Adıyaman. And I know that some of you, I see familiar names in the call today. I know that some of you are also planning to come up with your own initiatives as well. Small businesses are the beating heart of the local economy, and you, together with your networks through national and regional level chambers, know their needs when it comes to supporting their recovery. Local markets, through your value and supply chains, provide important information for humanitarian agencies on the types of products and services that each organization can offer during the earthquake response. So the main message here really is that you, the private sector, you're an important part and that you have a critical role to play in this humanitarian response. Now, if we go to the next part though, I understand that this is not always easy because we do have barriers and challenges when it comes to private sector engagement. So, however, we admit that there are always challenges and lessons learned. And if we go to the next slide, you will see that when it comes to private sector engagement and humanitarian response, we have seen the challenges comes from differences between the private sector and humanitarian organizations, when, especially when it comes to language, approach, and pace. And admittedly, having worked in the private sector and now also with the UN uses terms that normally the private sector is not familiar with, and it's the same. In the business community, we would normally use business continuation, and there are terms that the private sector uses that the UN or other humanitarian agencies would not necessarily be familiar with. So this difference sometimes leads to the inability to coordinate our activities properly, even though we want to work together, and can result to duplicating efforts. So there are limited avenues as well for discussions or opportunities to get to know who is doing what and where. Ideally, in an ideal scenario, the private sector is included in what we call the coordination mechanism, working hand in hand with local actors, with the government and other humanitarian partners. And you have the private sector represented by business forums, industry associations, or representatives of chambers of commerce, and that they are invited, or you are invited, to sit down together with humanitarian agencies. More often than not, when we say private sector engagement, people think that it's always about fundraising. And I've experienced that, because when even when I was still in the private sector, and now the private sector engagement focal point, sometimes I have seen comments that private sector engagement is all about fundraising. Philanthropy is one way of engaging the private sector, but it's not just the only way, because we know companies can provide so much more when it comes to expertise, technology. And this is what we've seen from how mobile network companies, not just in Türkiye for the earthquake response, but also in other emergencies, we've seen how they also help humanitarian response operations by providing their services as part of their business model and as their contribution, or rather their obligation to the company, to their customers, and to the bigger community that they serve in. And lastly, we know that the private sector is doing a lot, but admittedly, we don't really do a great job of capturing the remarkable work that you're doing. And this is important, particularly in earthquake emergencies such as this, so that we not only show concretely the contribution of the private sector, but also make sure that lessons learned and good practices are documented for future references. And lastly, if we go to my last slide, you've heard from Sebastian, shelter, water, sanitation, and hygiene. These are focus areas that humanitarian agencies, both UN and non-UN, are working together. And these shelter, water, sanitation, and hygiene, they still remain as priority humanitarian needs. However, we also hear several initiatives or private sector initiatives ongoing to support livelihood and recovery for small, medium-sized enterprises, or SMEs. I want to let you know that you can use us, you can use me as a resource to help connect you with relevant implementing agencies, both UN and non-UN, so that we can also support you with your activities. As the Connecting Business Initiative, and Karim has mentioned, we have a wealth of resources designed for, with, and by the private sector. And I see some of our member networks from different parts of the world connected with us right now. So these are resources coming from a wealth of experience from different countries: Peru, Philippines, Fiji, Haiti, Madagascar. These are resources to help connect you with, to help provide you with information when it comes to preparedness, response, and recovery, and what the private sector can do. So please feel free to visit our website and get in touch with us if you want to learn more about these resources. And lastly, in terms of how the private sector, how you can also help with the ongoing response and the coming recovery efforts, we have what we call the private sector contribution tracker. Feel free to scan the code that you see here on your screen and share with us. Share with us information about your activities. And to end, again, I cannot emphasize this enough, but thank you. The local private sector can play a critical role in humanitarian response and at the same time recovery efforts. By building relationships, integrating the private sector in response activities, providing support, facilitating access, and ensuring transparency, accountability, and information or information sharing sessions like this one can effectively promote engagement and collaboration with the private sector, with you, in order to address the needs of the most affected community. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Rhiza, for your comments. Thank you again, colleagues. I see 129 people on the line with us today. We've had this preliminary presentation now from Sebastian, from Rhiza, and we'd really like to turn it over to hear from you. We'd like to respond to your questions. Many of you submitted questions when you registered. If you have questions or comments now, please use the Q&A function in Zoom or raise your hand. I'd like now to invite Ms. Simay Kardesh, who is the Associate Director of Business for Goals, or the B4G platform. Ms. Simay is going to be moderating this next portion of our session today, and she has the questions, as I mentioned, that many of you submitted at the time of registration. So without further ado, Simay, the floor is yours.
Çok teşekkürler bugün bizimle bir arada olduğunuz ve nasıl işbirliği yapabiliriz sorusuna birlikte yanıt aldığınız için çok teşekkür ederiz. Ben daha önceden kayıt esnasında bize gelen sorular içerisinde bugün özellikle Sebastian'dan da görüşlerini duymak istediğim için kendisiyle bir başlamak istiyorum. Sebastian, bizi duyabiliyor musun? Belki seyahat ediyorlardır şu anda. Onlar çünkü sahadalar. Rhiza, sana bir soru yönlendiririm aslında. Özel sektörün afet süreçlerine katılımı ve bu süreçlerde özel sektörle işbirliğinin önünde karşılaşılan zorluklar, engeller nelerdir? Bu konuda bizimle görüşlerini paylaşabilir misin?
Çok teşekkürler, Simay. Thank you so much. And I do know that I've touched on this during the presentation, but maybe just to share a bit of information from my own experience. I came from the Philippines, and it was a very long journey for us to reach a point where the private sector can sit next to our partners in discussing the role of the private sector and acknowledging their contribution when it comes to humanitarian response and recovery efforts. And as part of the whole of nation approach to disaster risk reduction and management, it took a while because and it took a while, and also it took a lot of discussions, gaining trust and confidence from each other. And really what helped, as what we've seen, is having opportunities like this one, avenues to discuss who is doing what, how we can coordinate our activities together, because we have seen that the private sector can move very, very fast, and we've seen this in this emergency. Private sector can move fast. Private sector can mobilize resources very, very fast and efficiently. But then there are very limited opportunities to know, to get to know what are we doing, and how are we coordinating this better. So where I came from, it took years for us to also have discussions and really that tight relationship with different partners to say that we're all here to help. And I know with the CBI member networks that are dialing in right now from different countries, they know this very well. The private sector wants to help. But I guess it's important that we also promote an environment that we're in. The different representatives from the business community, from the government, as well as from humanitarian agencies, can really discuss and understand the differences when it comes to approaches, but at the same time, the complementarity when it comes to approaches, expertise, resources, and an approach that each one can bring to the table.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rhiza. And I heard that Sebastian is back and he's with us. So I just would like to pose a question to him. Just 1 second, I'm just facing some screen issues here. Okay, so Sebastian, our question to you is that how can support from the private sector be aligned with the humanitarian coordination mechanism to better assist the affected people? Over to you, Sebastian.
Thank you very much indeed, and that's a very good question. The simple answer is that one of the reasons we work in sectors and one of the reasons we work the way we do is to be as transparent and accountable as possible, but also to be very clear and very obvious in the way that we work. If, for instance, a private sector partner had a particular interest in becoming involved in a shelter solution, then the shelter sector is there, all the partners are there. If, for instance, say a private sector partner wanted to support in water, sanitation and hygiene, and again, the sector is there. And the easiest way to make those contacts is to reach out through Rhiza, who can put you directly in touch with people who are in Gaziantep or in any of the 4 hubs which we're currently staffing. And in that way, it's a very predictable system, and I'd be very happy to share, if it hasn't already been done so, an overview of which sectors are operating here, so that you know exactly where you can plug in. Over.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you so much. So I'm just trying to check if Erhan, if you are in the meeting, just you can raise your hand. Yes, please. Okay, so Kerim, can you promote Şeyda Dağlı as a panelist so that Erhan can respond the question? This is my understanding of what's going on here. Okay, so Erhan, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so great, thank you.
Can you hear me?
Evet, seni duyabiliyoruz Erhan. Erhan,
Great.
bize bu webinar esnasında kayıt yapılırken gelen sorulardan bir tanesi aslında Türkiye'nin mevcut ABD ve AB arasındaki özel ticaret anlaşmalarının bu süreçte ihracatı canlandırmak ve ekonomik toparlanmayı desteklemek için nasıl yararlı olabileceği üzerine TÜRKONFED ve SEDEFED temsilcisi olarak bugün aramızda bulunuyorsun. Bu konuda senden görüşlerini alabilir miyiz?
Tabii, seve seve. Yani özellikle Türkiye ve ABD arasındaki ikili ilişkilere baktığımız zaman son 50-100 yıla baktığımız zaman aslında iyi düzeyde seyreden ikili ilişkiler var. Bu anlamda her iki ülkenin de sahip olduğu büyük ekonomik potansiyele rağmen aslında ekonomik düzeyin ikili seviyedeki ilişkilerin biraz gerisinde kaldığını söylemek mümkün. Bu anlamda ABD pazarının büyüklüğü ve ihracatçılarımızın potansiyeli bakımından ciddi bir çekicilik bulunmaktadır. İş insanları, meslek kuruluşları, sektörel kuruluşlar bu yönde de girişimlerini sürdürmektedirler. Tekstil sektörü, diğer sektörler özelinde bir serbest ticaret anlaşması çok değerli olacaktır. Bu anlamda bizim üyelerimizin de genel anlamda STA'lara büyük ölçüde prensip olarak olumlu yaklaştıklarını gözlemliyoruz. Tabii potansiyel ABD ile bir serbest ticaret anlaşmasının tamamlanması veya yapılması noktasında en önemli taraflardan bir tanesi bu konunun devletler arası bir konu olması ve buna rağmen bağımsız iş dünyası örgütlerinin görüşlerinin alınması çok değerli olacaktır nacizane. Bir diğeri burada Türkiye'nin AB ile, yani Avrupa Birliği ile olan gümrük birliği konusundaki içeriklere, regülasyonlara dikkat edilmesi gereği. Ve son olarak da paylaşmam gerekirse hem sektörel hem de büyüklük, işletme büyüklüğü anlamında sivil toplum örgütlerinin temsil ettiği, örneğin KOBİ'ler olabilir. Bu başlıkların altında anlaşmaların özel bir yerinin olması değerli olacaktır. Yani KOBİ'lere özel örneğin bazı geçiş sürelerinin tanımlanması, işte vergi, tax break dediğimiz vergi muafiyetlerinin, özel sürelerin tanımlanması gibi büyüklük ve sektör gözetimine uygun bir anlaşmanın yapılmasının değerli olacağını düşünmekteyiz. Teşekkür ederim.
Teşekkürler yanıtınız için. Bu arada Can Atacık bize bir soru iletmişti. Şu an Katie, evet Kerim sen de yazdın. Katie Yanker, bu alanda çalışan mekanizmalarla yani inovatif finance mekanizmalarıyla ilgili sizi Can Bey bir şekilde buluşturacak. Bize bu oturumdan sonra ulaşabilirsiniz. El kaldıran dinleyicilerimiz arasında Deniz Kaçmaz vardı. Size chatten ulaşmaya çalıştık. Eğer hazırsanız sizi yayına alabiliriz. Yani değilse Kamil Witkowski ile devam etmek istiyorum. Hazır mısınız?
Yeah, I'm ready. I hope you can hear me well.
Okay, yeah, we can hear you very well, so please go ahead.
Okay, Kamil Witkowski from Poland. So as you know, we are facing maybe not similar, but also disaster in the context of war in Ukraine. So simply my comment, very short one, is to promote a partnership which is possible for Turkey, especially in the context of this horrible earthquake with UNOPS, with United Nations Office of Project Services. In fact, I'm here on behalf of Tim Lardner from UNOPS Ukraine. So we signed recently an MOU between UN Global Compact here in Poland and UNOPS in Ukraine. Plus, we are establishing a UNOPS Poland office to deliver very quickly international aid to Ukraine using UN public procurement mechanisms. Simply, so we are ready to share our experiences with you, hoping that this could help. I'm already in contact with my colleagues from UN Global Compact Network Turkey. Karen also knows me very well, and so if any assistance from our side will be needed, simply let us know. Also from Polish companies which already delivered a lot to Turkey, but of course we are ready to do much more. Also, let me let you know that the team of procurement specialists, they are already in Turkey from UNOPS. So if we will build from these elements more or less similar approach as we build it in Poland, I hope that will be a good solution for this catastrophe you are facing. So simply also sympathies from Poland to all of you, and of course we are ready to help. So please guide us how. Thank you very much.
Çok teşekkürler soru için. Panelistlerimiz, konuşmacılarımız içerisinde yanıtlamak isteyen var ise kendilerine söz vermek isterim. Evet, bu konudaki detaylar için biz sizinle tekrar bu oturum sonrasında görüşebiliriz. Aslında e-posta adreslerimizi de chatbox üzerinden paylaşabiliriz diye düşünüyorum. Şimdi bize ayrılan sürenin de sonuna doğru yaklaştık. Son bir soru var. Ben bunu Rhiza'ya sorabileceğimi düşünüyorum. Ve akabinde de aslında bu oturumu tamamlayabiliriz. Rhiza. Sorumuz şöyle, sadece müdahale için değil, aynı zamanda afet sonrası iyileşme, yani recovery aşaması için de özel sektör katılımını teşvik etmek için pratik önerileriniz nelerdir? CBI Network'ü diğer ülkelerde hangi araçları kullanıyor? Bir bunu da soralım istedik.
Sure. So I'll keep it very, very brief as well. So number one, if you are planning or have already completed activities in support of the humanitarian response and planning still to continue supporting and also planning to come up with activities in support of the recovery efforts, feel free to get in touch with me. So I'm here as the private sector engagement focal point and also the focal for the CBI network in Türkiye, so that we can also capture and help facilitate information or connections that you will be needing to support your activities. By being part of a CBI or the Connecting Business initiative, we have resources from different private sector networks in different countries that have undergone or have gone through similar experiences. We've seen examples of how private sector networks had set up their business recovery hubs or business recovery centers, helping small and medium-sized enterprises when it comes to business recovery tips, and at the same time facilitating livelihood recovery projects. So get in touch with me, and at the same time talk to local chambers of commerce, business associations, industry federations. Identify what are your priority needs. Identify what is being planned when it comes to supporting not just the response, but also the recovery efforts. And from there on, we can try to connect the dots, who is doing what, so that we can ensure complementarity of efforts, resources, and at the same time, our networks as well.
Okay. Thank you so much, Rhiza. So as we are approaching the end of the session, I would just hand it over to Karim.
Thank you so much, Simai. Thank you so much, colleagues, all of you who have joined us here today for this hour. We've thrown a lot of information out at you, and it's quite a lot to absorb. I think that the point that we'd like to really emphasize here is that we're just at the beginning of this humanitarian response. There's a long road ahead in terms of response, in terms of recovery and reconstruction. And it's very clear to us that the domestic and the international private sector will have a major role to play. So we really encourage you to reach out to us. You see our contact information here on this screen. We're also going to be circulating for everyone on this call and everyone who's registered for this event some of the materials that were discussed earlier today, including the flash appeal, the business brief, and some of our guidance notes for businesses that are responding in a humanitarian emergency. We really do encourage you to reach out. You have the information as well of TÜRKONFED and Business for Goals. For those of you who are inside of Türkiye, for those of you who are outside of Türkiye, please do reach out to Rhiza Nery as well. We thank you for your contributions. We thank you for your support to the people of Türkiye, and we wish you a pleasant and productive remainder of the week. Thank you all very much, and take care.